Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. Let's dive right into it. So, X-Men 97. Oh my goodness, is this some great stuff. I mean, being a longtime X-Men fan, I was pretty excited for Disney's X-Men 97, though I was a little apprehensive because shows are really hit or miss with Disney. They're great or they're garbage, especially coming out of any major Disney studio branch like Marvel. Although Marvel Animation does seem to be rocking it lately with their very few projects, albeit, but I don't think that they've made one that I've disliked or that I've seen any kind of banal hatred for. But being an avid X-Men fan, as I am, I, of course, deep dived into all of the comics that the show derived from to see if there were any clues as to what was going to happen or what direction we were going to go with. And it should be noted, though, that the show itself is not following any one storyline from the comics. Rather, it is drawing from several comic issues and stories like Uncanny X-Men, Inferno, Mutant Massacre, Life Death, and a couple others. So we are getting things like certain outfits that are pulled right from the comics. We're getting the characters as they are in the comics and in the X-Men animated series from the 90s. We get plot lines and developments and interactions all pulled directly out of a lot of different, very beloved comic issues. And at first, it sounds like a hot mess. Like if you're just in the storyboard room and you're hearing all of what's going to be kind of thrown at the wall to make this show, it would not sound too great, I imagine, at first. And one of my fears was that all of this would be tied together with a lot more modern day politicization, that it would be a transitional show like a lot of other Marvel shows had been, like Secret Invasion and Miss Marvel, or that it would just be a giant pandering bore. But it wasn't any of those things. And it shone really damn bright as a standalone show that was a clear continuation of its predecessor from the 90s. And from what I can tell, it was pretty well received by mostly everybody. I couldn't find anyone that either disliked it or outright hated it. And in a world where shows are made by committee and we have great IPs and shows that are plagued by just lazy writing or social pandering, we had one man step the hell up and steer this ship in probably the best direction possible. And that is the director and writer-producer, Beau DeMayo. Now, DeMayo has a pretty nice resume as far as creative leads goes. He worked on Moon Knight and the upcoming Blade movie, and he wrote a good amount of Season 2 for X-Men 97. Although, as Disney often does, it has shot itself in the foot, because they fired DeMayo shortly before the release of X-Men 97. Now, as far as I can tell, it hasn't been explicitly said why Disney did this, but it's been commented that the reasons may be that he was, quote-unquote, difficult to work with, as well as, having an OnlyFans account. I mean, people being difficult to work with could be a large variety of things, so that's really vague in its reasoning, and it's pretty weak to me. And having an OnlyFans account, I don't think that matters so much as why a lead creative at Disney feels like he needs the supplementary income. But regardless, DeMeo made a wonderful X-Men adaptation, and I think future shows, both animated and live action, will be lesser due to his absence. So, yeah, huge mistake on Disney's part. We also got a good core of the voice actors returning to reprise their roles, like Cal Dodd coming back as Wolverine and Lenore Zan as Rogue. So we have a pretty star-studded cast of veterans and a creative lead with this show that's really steering and taking the whole process into the direction it needs to go in. It's tough to not get excited with just these guys at the helm. But let's talk about the meat and potatoes of the show itself. How did it stand up? What was the quality of animation? What was the dialogue like? Did the themes and ideas behind what was happening in the show make sense, and were they compelling? Was it just fun overall? Was it one of those shows where you could switch your brain off and just have a bunch of fun? Well, I think the story overall, because it's only 10 episodes, I think the story stands really well. From the second I heard the classic intro music, I was immediately pulled back into the 90s, and my childhood was rekindled. I even went so far as to grab a huge bowl of cereal to lay down in front of the TV. That's how much it took me back. And something you also notice straight off the bat is the animation style. Well, the animation was beautiful in that the team definitely kept the style from the 90s cartoon while updating the quality. It kept its 2D, pencil-drawn, shaded art style, emphasizing heavy line usage, bright colors, dark shading to highlight important moments and features. And I am a huge fan of the older styles of animation, probably because of the nostalgia effect, and it's what I grew up with. Whatever. I think animators in general have kind of gotten caught up in the advent of 3D style animation variants, and progress and updated styles, new tools, right? That's all great, but there's a point of excess, right, where the animation becomes far too smooth and round, and it's very childish looking, and it's kind of off-putting and distracting, and it very much distracts from how well the writing for the characters or the story could be. And the characters are given almost whole arcs, at least with the likes of Jean, Scott, Wolverine, Storm, Magneto, Xavier, basically all the main X-Men characters. All of them have a bit of an arc over the course of just 10 episodes, which is not a lot of screen time. I mean, to give at least a little something to just about every main in the big cast of complex characters, I mean, any kind of dedicated development, much less a story arc where we get to see them grow and change and become a way cooler character that's going to tackle the challenges ahead. I mean, that's why we have character arcs and growth and development, is so that they can deal with whatever the antagonist is at the end of the story. or close to the end of the story, let's say. And I know the show has been out a good while, but I won't go into too many spoilers here for anyone who hasn't had the time to see it. But man, it's got to be said that my two main favorite characters, Wolverine and Magneto, had some amazing writing. And I mean, the growth and the challenges, I couldn't get enough. I mean, Magneto especially. Because you go through the events of the show and you really get convinced that Magneto is right. Which is a funny thing in a way, because since the show's hiatus at the end of it in the 90s, the world's just got a ton more intolerant in a lot of ways, which, you know, kind of proves Magneto's fears to be correct. So he's got to be changed, right? In a really subtle way, to where he's made a bit more sympathetic or reasonable. And the writers did this masterfully. DeMeo, I think, this is probably his best contribution, is them molding Magneto in such a way that it was a very plot-driven, natural direction for Magneto to go. But it's also being done with modern-day writers. Right? This is 30 years later, so writers have different mindsets. They're dealing with different social issues, different political issues. Other new stuff is happening in the world. So all of that is naturally going to want to bleed into their writing. But I think DeMeo kept a lot of that at bay. I think he knew that was going to happen. So he either stopped it or he filtered it into something that would make more sense for these characters, especially Magneto. And Wolverine. Oh boy. Oh, Wolverine. Okay, a little spoiler if you haven't seen the show. So, Mr. Sinister has cloned Jean Grey and replaced her with the clone. So the clone is with the X-Men. Since this episode, I think in the middle of the show, like its second season, back in the 90s. So the entire time, the X-Men have been palling around with the cloned Jean Grey, who we know later on, and from the comic books, as Madeline Pryor. So they both have the same memories, the same emotions. Almost everything about them is the same. It's very confusing and conflicting for them, especially for Scott, who had a baby with Madeline, who he thought was Jean, but then Jean escapes Sinister's lab and makes her way to the mansion after the baby's born, and things get crazy. But my man Wolverine is also conflicted because he loves Jean Grey. That's one of his character traits and kind of flaws, is he loves this woman who's in this deeply committed relationship, and he's got to deal with that. And all of a sudden, all of this is supremely subtle, but during the whole trio of trouble being worked out between Scott, Jean, and Madeline, my boy Wolverine is over here like, well, the Boy Scout can only be married to one of them, so which one's up for grabs? I mean, That's all I wanted for Wolverine the entire time, is for one of them to be like, yeah, this relationship with Scott, it's not my thing, actually. I'm gonna go ahead, go over there and do my own thing. And also Wolverine. Like, I mean, my guy deserves something, for God's sake. After everything he's been through, just throw him a bone. But, you know, understandably that can't really happen, because it would kind of buff against his loner, always beaten down, badass motif. And honestly, it's his anger and his brooding nature that lends a lot of power to his presence. So I can understand why this wasn't done. But honestly, if you're a Wolverine fan, you want something good for this guy. I mean, it's hard not to. So the dialogue in this show is real interesting. In general, I mean, it was corny and fun and pretty comic book traditional, I would say. You had Storm being all kind of poetic and such with her sayings like, well, they have not yet felt the power of the elements. And that's always fun. But you also have Magneto running around referring to himself in this pseudo third person, like the Master of Magnetism did not expect this, or the Master of Magnetism approves. Yeah, like, it's just so damn silly. But it's a really fun style that leans into what it's coming from. Comic book characters. This is all being said by comic book characters, so it all sounds like what they would say, which is much more authentic and true to form than trying to humanize or modernize the dialogue and make it something that it's not, which is the unfortunate route that most other Disney reboots or continuations will go down. So, thankfully, in so many ways, this show stays really damn faithful to the source materials. And I think that's probably the main reason I love this show so much, where I didn't expect to be totally honest. In just about every way, it felt just like the comics and the show from the 90s. But even aside from that, it's a show that's noticeably different than a more modern day comic book adaptation show like Invincible or The Boys. Those shows sound, look, feel very much like modern day shows and comics. And they fit because they're recent adaptations and the source material came out not too long ago. But X-Men was coming out in the 70s and the 80s. So updated aspects don't quite fit very well. And again, I think DeMeo was making some really conscious decisions here to keep things as they were instead of updating and modernizing where it would end up being inappropriate. So all in all, if you haven't seen it, I don't know why you haven't watched it yet, other than not wanting to give Disney your money, which I very much understand nowadays. But get out there and find it. Watch it, love it. You won't be disappointed at the least. And the last episode, wow. They do things in that last episode that's clearly setting up for the second season. And for as great as season 1 was, season 2 is going to hit. I'm getting chills just thinking about it. But that is all the time I have for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Stick around for more Sci-Fi Unchained. But for now, live long and prosper, my friends, and may the Force be with us all.